Bonjour, Kinamagi and Ireland Indigenous, and welcome to this production of Social Studies Explorer. Today's episode, the Treaty of Paris, Day 2. This lesson will both serve as an intro to the review day and a discussion of the Treaty of Paris. Essentially, our goal today is to wrap up the basics of this unit. In our next session, we'll review for the test, and in our final session, you'll take the test. And then we'll have wrapped up the American Revolution, and we'll move into the Articles of Confederation when we resume after break. So the American Revolution, there's a number of events listed here. The Second Continental Congress, the Declaration of Independence, winter at Valley Forge, Battle of Saratoga, Battle of Yorktown, the Treaty of Paris. Those are some of those key events that we've been talking about during this chapter, unit. And there will be some questions on the test related to that. Some of the ideas of this unit: inalienable rights, like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness; limited government, where the government has specific tasks and roles, but isn't a monarch like England. Government by consent, that means we elect people to vote for us, and their power is derived from us. Right of revolution, the idea that if your government no longer serves the people, that we could overthrow it. And sovereignty, which is the ability to make decisions for your nation without influence from another. And sovereignty usually applies to one of two groups: nation states and tribal nations as far as the United States goes. We talked about advantages and disadvantages. Military leadership. The British had a much more well-trained army and a military leadership with a lot more experience. Something along the lines of having, an empire that stretches around the globe. Geography tended to favor the Americans, especially once they realized that if you didn't just line up and walk in straight lines to get shot, the British were going to struggle with having to chase the Americans through the woods, especially if you think of Nathaniel Greene and his hit and run style here. Resources could be an advantage and disadvantage to both. At the beginning of the war, the British are much more efficient at arming their soldiers and having proper attire to fight a war. But they also had to get their supplies, in many cases, from the other side of the ocean. The Continentals, they have their resources right here. The downside is, as we see at Valley Forge, that it doesn't always help that you're close by if you don't have the material in the first place. And obviously, there is a greater incentive for the Continentals. They were fighting for their own freedom. Some of the people that were talked about, the difference between a patriot and a loyalist. A patriot supported the revolution, and a loyalist supported maintaining the relationship with Great Britain. It's funny how we choose terminology, because a loyalist was a patriot to the government that they had always had. So they're both patriotic. It was just a difference if you wanted to be represented by King George or someone else. Speaking of George, some of the people we talked about: George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, the first and third presidents there, Benjamin Franklin, our key diplomat, Patrick Henry and his fiery speeches, Samuel Adams, John Adams, Thomas Paine, a little common sense there. We also talked about African Americans, American Indians, and women, and how they supported the war effort or how they were impacted by the war. The effects of all of this: freedom from British rule, creation of the United States, and self-government. The 1863 that officially ended the war. As a result of the treaty, Britain recognized the United States as an independent country. Treaty also set the boundaries of the United States. The young country stretched all the way to the Mississippi River, irregardless of the people that already lived on that land. The decision to fight a war for independence ended up being one of the most important decisions in our country's history, which might go in a double duh factor, because if we didn't fight a war for independence, our country would be part of a different country. Just saying. All right, so we have a picture here. It says the horse America throwing its master. Political cartoons have always been a thing. And in this case, it's kind of symbolic if we are bucking the British right on off. We're going to be our own country. You can see a primary source of view of the treaty. You can see signatures here. John Adams, Ben Franklin. We're not going to do the simulation, though it's a useful item, but due to time constraints. All right, some of the key things from the Treaty of Paris. Britain recognized the United States as an independent country. The boundaries of the United States were established, as you saw yesterday and today. It stretched all the way to the Mississippi River, south down to the line with Florida, and also into New Orleans. Up until pretty close to the current border between us and Canada. Fishing rights were granted to the United States in the Grand Banks and in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, which was a huge deal. And in most cases, international fishing rights are still a big deal. Britain recently left the European Union, and they're still debating about fishing rights. All right, people who are owed money by other country were allowed to collect their debts, try to make the people whole. The U.S. Congress was to ask state legislatures to pay loyalists for property they had lost. Loyalists were to be treated fairly. I'm not sure how well this was all going to work out here. And the prisoners of war on both sides were to be released, just customary at the end of a war. And British forces were to be evacuated from the United States. This, however, does not come quickly, and in fact would be more than a quarter century before this happens. As you may be aware, the British didn't leave Michigan very quickly. And they were expecting to sign the treaty within 6 months, or should be approved. So here's a border. You can see that we have disputed property up here in along our border with Canada. A stretch here north of Spanish Florida. And then there's a huge area of dispute over here. Talk about that in another unit. This is Spanish. Spain ends up with this territory, although soon after this it becomes French again, and we'll buy it from the French on sale. $15 million. Not a bad deal. There's some consequences to the American Revolution. Short term, many loyalists left the United States, and many of them returned either to Canada or Great Britain. I mean, some went to other colonies. People began to move west, which is going to be a huge problem, as there were already people living in the West, and the colonists believed that, hey, we can claim land, even though it was already owned or possessed or lived on, which obviously is the more Native American lands were taken. British soldiers had to leave and head for home or Canada. Canada seems nice. Maybe I'd rather go there. There were war debts to pay. Nah, I like watching Premier League soccer. Go back there. And a lot of war debts. War is not cheap, and you have to pay for it. It's always been a problem. Americans felt a new sense of unity and patriotism. Realistically, prior to this point, there was, each of the colonies were their own independent idea. And that really kind of holds true largely until the Civil War. but people, viewed themselves as Virginians or New Yorkers or whatever state they may be from. We start trying to unify the country into one solid entity, and the U.S. begins to trade with many nations. Some of the long-term consequences, the revolution became a model for other revolutions, such as those in Latin America and France. Don't forget France. Um, the government by consent became a guiding principle in the United States, sort of. Limited government became a guiding principle in the United States, and that is something that is still argued over today. What exactly is limited government? Um, there are some who want government to do nothing until they need something. And there are others who want government to be big enough to help people. Something that you'll have to look into um, as you become a voter and see where you're going to fit on that spectrum. And people in many places changed the way they viewed government. Prior to this point, it was very easy to dislike the king. In public, it's God save the queen, God save the king. Inside the house, it's I don't like that dude. Um, Now, when you're starting to vote for people to represent you, um, you get a little bit of a feeling of pride, I suppose. Although that does also lead to partisanship and a lot of mess later on. Your assignment today is I want you to list 5 important things you learned about the American Revolution. You're going to take what we discussed today, and it'll be also discussed tomorrow as we do the unit review. But for today, you return to the Google Classroom or fill out this paper listing 5 important things. You're allowed to use any of your resources, including the internet and each other, to discuss what you really learned. At this point, return to your Google Classroom or to your paper and make sure you turn this in or hit submit at the end. Have a minute, Gishgat, Minwa, Pama P.